Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia LaCivita, and I'm the Director for the Division of Risk Management. It is my pleasure to be able to share with you the role of the division in the review of new drug, biological, and generic applications, as well as post-approval when safety concerns occur for products that may require a REMS. I will be providing an overview of the REMS authorities and the agency's current thinking on REMS as described in guidance. Dr. Sheppard will join me in providing an overview of the Division of Risk Management's role in the review of the various applications, both pre- and post-marketing. The learning objectives for today's session include: understand when the agency can require a REMS, describe the types of changes that can be made to REMS, identify all components of a complete REMS submission, and describe the role of the Division of Risk Management in the life cycle of a REMS. The agency has over 50 years of experience with risk management programs. During this time, a variety of terms have been used to describe these programs, including risk management programs, risk minimization action plans or risk maps, and risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, also known as REMS. In 1988, the Accutane Pregnancy Prevention Program was established by Hoffmann-La Roche, the manufacturer of Accutane, isotretinoin. The program's aim was to reduce the occurrence of pregnancies exposed to isotretinoin. In 1989, Clozaril or clozapine was the first product approved with a restricted drug distribution program. And in 1992, the regulations for Subpart E and H were finalized. This allowed for accelerated approval of drugs and biological products for serious or life-threatening illness. This regulation also included provisions for the approval of drugs with restrictions for use. In 1998, thalidomide was approved under Subpart H. Between 2000 and 2004, Lotrinex, Tysabri, and Vioxx were removed from the market for safety concerns. Lotrinex and Tysabri were later reintroduced to the market with a risk management program. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but it was not until 2007 that the Food and Drug Amendments Act provided the authority to require risk evaluation and mitigation programs, or REMS. And in 2008, the first REMS, Entereg, was approved. REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. It is a risk management plan required beyond FDA-approved professional labeling. FDA gave the agency the authority to require REMS if it was determined necessary to ensure the benefits outweigh the risk. The REMS authorities apply to NDAs, BLAs, and ANDAs, and can be required either pre- or post-marketing. In comparison to overall drug approvals, only a small number of drugs or products have required additional measures to mitigate the risk and preserve benefits through a REMS. Since 2007, there have been several updates to the REMS authorities and requirements. The FDA Safety and Innovation Act, or FDASIA, was the first to update the REMS. It included changes to modifying the REMS. FDASIA required that the agency develop guidance to help implement these changes, and I will speak more about that later. Additionally, sponsors no longer needed to provide an assessment of the REMS if they proposed a modification. Instead, they must include adequate rationale to support the modification. This act also removed the requirement for the agency to open discussions with the sponsor no later than 60 days after the REMS assessment report is submitted. The 21st Century Cures Act changed the requirement that the agency annually take a REMS to the Drug Safety and Risk Management Advisory Committee. The requirement was updated to say at least periodically seek input from stakeholders through the Drug Safety and Risk Management Advisory Committee or other advisory committee. The Substance Use Disorder Prevention that promotes opioid recovery and treatment for patients and communities, or the SUPPORT Act, added an additional authority to be able to require certain packaging and safe disposal technology for drugs that pose a serious risk of abuse or overdose. And lastly, the Appropriations Act of 2020. This act changed the REMS requirements for ANDAs that are subject to a REMS that includes elements to assure safe use. You'll be hearing more about these changes later this afternoon from my colleagues Elaine Littman and Laura Zandel during their presentation. FADA lay out the statutory factors that must be considered for determining a REMS. They include the estimated size of the population likely to use the drug, seriousness of the disease or condition to be treated, expected benefit of the drug, duration of treatment with the drug, seriousness of any known or potential adverse effects related to the use of the drug, and background rate of such events in population likely to use the drug, and whether the drug is a new molecular entity. The components of a REMS can include a medication guide or patient package insert, communication plan for healthcare providers, certain packaging and safe disposal technologies for drugs that pose a serious risk of abuse or overdose. This is a new authority under the Support Act. Elements to assure safe use, which may include restricted distribution, an implementation system, and timetable for submission of assessments. REMS can include one or more of the following elements to assure safe use. Depending on the goal of the REMS, elements may be combined to create the program. For example, the elements are prescribers have specific training, experience, or special certifications, pharmacists or other dispensers specially certified, the drug be dispensed only in certain healthcare settings, such as infusion centers and hospitals, the drug be dispensed with evidence of safe use conditions such as laboratory tests, each patient using the drug be subject to monitoring, and each patient using the drug be enrolled in a registry. When the REMS authorities were authorized in 2007, it created a need for guidance. Guidance provide the agency thinking on certain topics and offer guidance to industry as well as other stakeholders. These are some of the early guidances pertaining to risk management, and under PDUFA 3, the agency agreed to produce guidance for industry on risk management activities for drug and biological products. The first one is pre-marketing risk assessment. The center is development and use of risk minimization action plans. And the third is good pharmacovigilance practices and pharmacologic assessment. The center guidance on risk minimization action plans or risk maps embodies many of the principles in the REMS provisions as implemented by the agency. The first draft guidance for industry on REMS was issued in 2009, and it was the format and content of proposed risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, assessments, and modifications. It provided FDA's thinking at that time on the format and content that industry should use for submissions of a proposed REMS. It also described each potential element of a REMS, and it included preliminary information on the content of assessments and proposed modifications of approved REMS. This guidance has been replaced by newer guidance, which I will cover in the next few slides. Soon after the REMS authorities were implemented, all new medication guides were approved with the REMS. This guidance reversed and revised that policy that products that had a medication guide were required to have a REMS. The 2011 guidance provides the distribution requirements for medication guides in a REMS. The orange line on the graph is all new REMS approvals, and the yellow reflects REMS approved with medication guides only. Medication guide only REMS made up the majority of REMS approvals between 2008 and 2009. The green line reflects that soon after issuing the guidance in 2011, many of the medication guide only REMS were released. The medication guide remained part of labeling, but were not part of an approved REMS. The Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act of 2012, or FDASIA, amended the provisions for modification of REMS. That included REMS revisions. These were nominal changes that could be implemented without agency approval. REMS revisions consist of editorial changes that do not affect the information on the REMS materials covering the serious risks or the safe use of the product. It do not change the actions stakeholders must take. All other changes to REMS are considered either minor or major modifications. A minor modification may have a limited effect on REMS information and materials, while changes that are substantial are considered major modifications. A minor modification must be acted on by the agency within 60 days, a major modification within 180 days, and and REMS modifications due to safely labeling changes that are considered conforming to the labeling change must be acted on by the agency within 60 days. The draft guidance was published in 2015 and later finalized in 2019. The red on the graph notes the ability to revise REMS after the posting of the guidance. In 2017, the agency published the draft guidance on the format and content of a REMS. This guidance incorporated feedback from the various stakeholders to standardize concepts and more clearly communicate what a stakeholder is required to do. This guidance supersedes the information that was included in the 2009 guidance. It also supports submission of a REMS document in structured product labeling, SPL, and the REMS website uses a very similar format. The framework of the template includes who, the participant who must meet the REMS requirement, such as the prescriber, dispenser, or the healthcare setting. When is the particular stage in the treatment or the medication use process around which the REMS activities need to occur, such as certification, prescribing, dispensing, or administration of the drug. What is the clinical or administrative activity that must be performed as part of the REMS such as counseling a patient, completing an enrollment form, or laboratory testing? And with what is the approved REMS material with which the requirement is carried out, such as the enrollment form, the medication guide, or an educational pamphlet? This 2017 draft guidance on providing a regulatory submission in electronic format, specifically the content of a REMS document using structured product labeling, or SPL, was part of an effort by the agency to standardize REMS materials and more clearly communicate requirements to stakeholders. SPL can be used to capture and present REMS information in a format that is easily shared with stakeholders and can be readily incorporated into health information technology. You will hear more about this effort later this afternoon from our colleague, Dr. Tersicani. These following three guidances were in part developed to meet PDUFA 5 commitments. The final guidance on FDA's application of statutory factors in determining when a REMS is necessary was published in 2019. The draft guidance on REMS assessment planning and reporting covers considerations for the metrics, data sources, and methodologies that are intended to assess the performance of a REMS, and that the REMS assessment plan should also assess the impact of the REMS on the healthcare delivery system and patient access to treatment. The last guidance here is used for surveys. Surveys are frequently used to assess knowledge and behavior regarding interventions or actions in the REMS. This draft guidance discusses general principles and recommendations related to conducting knowledge surveys, including design, instrument development, and data collection and processing and data analysis. An ANDA approved under Section 505J is subject to the same REMS requirements as the reference listed drug, or the RLD, for any REMS that includes a medication guide or elements to ensure safe use. The requirements for the ANDA to develop a single shared system with the RLD when the RLD is approved with elements to ensure safe use recently changed with the Appropriations Act of 2020. You will hear more about those changes from my colleagues Elaine Littman and Laura Zindel later this afternoon. The Generic Drug User Fee Amendments, or GDUFA, was enacted in 2012 to speed access to safe and effective generic drugs. Under GDUFA, FDA committed to review and act on complete electronic ANDAs within 10 months after the date of the submission. Given the complexities of developing a shared system REMS under the review timeframes, the agency published a guidance on the development of a shared system REMS. The first shared system REMS was iPledge, and that was approved in October of 2010. Since then, there have been 16 shared system REMS that have been ever approved, and 14 are now active. Additionally, in 2017, the draft guidance on the use of the drug master file for shared system REMS submission was developed to improve the efficiency of the submission and the review of a shared system REMS. This is particularly helpful when there are many applicants. It improves version control and condenses review time. Since 2008 through April of 2020, the agency has approved 288 REMS. 84 of those contained elements to ensure safe use. Currently, there are 57 active REMS, and 49 of them include elements to ensure safe use. All but 2 of these REMS have been approved in CDER. Before I turn the presentation over to my co-presenter, Dr. Sheppard, I wanted to acknowledge that REMS are complex. Design, implementation, and outcomes are impacted by a variety of factors. They include, but of course are not limited to, the diversity in the healthcare system, evolving healthcare technology, and the REMS authorities may not always completely align with how healthcare is delivered. Additionally, specific risk mitigation strategy, adoption, and/or integration into the healthcare system can be impacted by stakeholder knowledge and beliefs. We continue to evaluate and improve our implementation of REMS authorities. As you will hear from my colleagues, we are looking for opportunities to better standardize REMS, integrate REMS into the healthcare system, and improve communicating important information to healthcare providers and patients. And now for our challenge question. The Food and Drug Administration Act, or FDAA, I want you to select the correct answer, promotes opioid recovery and treatment for patients and communities for 30 days, or details how to make structured REMS information available to patients and healthcare providers, or creates and restores equal access to equivalent samples, or authorize FDA to require sponsors to develop and comply with REMS programs if determined necessary to ensure the benefits outweigh the risk. Please select the best answer. I'll give you a second. The correct answer is D. This slide here is just a list of the REMS guidances, and the hyperlinks are included. And so I want to thank you for your attention today, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Sheppard. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Sheppard, and I will be discussing the roles of the Division of Risk Management. The Division of Risk Management falls under the Office of Medication Error, Prevention and Risk Management and the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. Our mission is to protect public health and promote safe and effective use of drugs by developing and evaluating strategies to minimize serious risks of drugs and effectively communicate drug risks. DRM is the focal point for risk management activities within CDER. We work to develop and implement programs and initiatives to support the Center's policies related to risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. We are responsible for conducting evaluations of all NMEs, BLAs, and other new drugs to determine the need for additional risk mitigation outside of labeling. Additionally, we review all REMS proposals, both pre-market and post-market, as well as any modifications to approved REMS and assessments submitted on approved REMS. So, when we look at the risk minimization, the determination of a REMS does not occur at a single point in the application process. Instead, risk minimization is a continual process built into the review of an application. Any discussions regarding the need for a REMS begin early in the application review process at the pre-NDA BLA meeting and continue throughout the life cycle of the application. We will go through DRM's activities in each stage of the REMS life cycle. We will first look at the pre-market stage. Risk management discussions often begin in the pre-NDA, pre-BLA phase. Pre-NDA or pre-BLA meetings are a good opportunity for sponsors to ask questions and obtain agency feedback. These meetings should be held sufficiently in advance of the planned submission of the application to allow for meaningful response to FDA feedback, and should generally occur no less than 2 months prior to the planned submission. DRM reviews submissions of every NME as well as 505(b)(2) and ANDA submissions if they reference a drug subject to a REMS, pose a new safety risk, or are a part of a class-wide REMS. A risk-benefit analysis will be conducted to determine if a REMS is necessary to ensure the benefits outweigh the risk of a drug. The analysis includes an assessment using the 6 FDAA factors previously discussed, as well as other data. In general, the REMS determination is made jointly with DRM and the Office of New Drugs. The preliminary REMS determination is then typically communicated to the sponsor with the mid-cycle communication. If we determine an application needs a REMS to ensure the benefits outweigh the risk, the agency will determine the goals and alert the sponsors to any required elements. It is important to note that the agency will not approve any application or efficacy supplement without an acceptable REMS if it is determined that one is required. If a REMS is required, a complete REMS submission should be made by the sponsor. A complete REMS submission should include a REMS document, all REMS materials, and the REMS supporting document. The supporting document includes the assessment plan, any noncompliance plans, and other details describing how the REMS will be operationalized. This document remains part of the application but is not made public. The RMA teams review the complete submission to ensure that the REMS document has all of the details and requirements that were outlined in the REMS notification and that they are incorporated and achievable, that the appended materials are aligned with the label and include any necessary materials or documentation needed to operationalize the program, and that the supporting document details the REMS operations. The implementation of the program should align with the required elements as well as minimize burden and patient access issues to the extent possible. Throughout the process of reviewing the REMS, the RMA may write several interim comment reviews and IRs to communicate any needed changes to the sponsors. Post-approval. So the REMS process does not end with the approval of a REMS. All REMS are required to submit assessments at predetermined intervals. Sponsors are responsible for conducting an assessment of the effectiveness of their REMS in order to determine whether the REMS is meeting its goals and to determine if any modifications to the REMS are necessary. My colleagues, Drs. Doris Oth and Shelley Harris, will discuss REMS assessments in further detail tomorrow. The FDA can require a REMS modification if it is determined it is necessary to ensure the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks, minimize the burden on the healthcare delivery system, or accommodate different comparable aspects of the elements to assure safe use for a drug that is subject to an application under 505J and the applicable listed drug. Additionally, the sponsor can propose modifications to REMS at any time. Minor modifications include changes that may nominally affect the risk messaging or change the REMS requirements. These are on a 3-month clock. Major modifications include changes that may substantially affect the risk message or change the REMS requirements. These are on a 6-month clock. Revisions are limited to editorial changes, correcting typographical errors, and changes in the application holder's name or address. Both minor and major modifications require a full and complete submission, complete with the REMS document, all appended materials, and the supporting document. Sponsors must also provide rationale for every change proposed in the REMS. All REMS materials are required to be submitted even if they are unchanging. So we don't work alone. The development of a REMS is a multidisciplinary process that involves many divisions within the FDA, as shown here. When a REMS includes a TASO, it will be discussed with senior level management in CDER. I want to stress how REMS are truly a collaborative process within the agency. Pre-market and post-market design involves new drugs, medical policy, compliance, regulatory policy, and surveillance and epidemiology. The development of shared system REMS adds in the expertise of the Office of Generic Drugs. Now for another challenge question. Which of the following statements is not true? A complete REMS submission includes the REMS document and all appended materials. B, The appended materials are aligned with the label and include any necessary materials or documentation to operationalize the program. C, the goals and required elements are determined by the agency. D, the agency may send several IRs to communicate any needed changes to the sponsor. I'll give you a minute to think about that. And the answer is A. So a complete REMS submission is going to include the REMS document, all appended materials, and the supporting document. And finally, there are websites that you may be interested in. REMS at FDA provides an up-to-date listing of all currently approved REMS, including the REMS document and all public-facing materials. The Risk Evaluation and Mitigation REMS website provides information about REMS, including FAQs for various stakeholders, and Drugs at FDA provides a database of all FDA-approved drugs. I'd like to thank you for allowing us to talk to you about our role in the risk management process at the FDA. We will now open up the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, Drs. LaCivita and Sheppard. We appreciate your presentations. They were so helpful. And this is for all of our participants in our audience. If you have questions, now is the time to type them in the chat pod in the lower right-hand corner. And you can ask our FDA subject matter experts anything about their presentations. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our first question for Dr. LaCivita. Is there any value in a sponsor submitting a rationale for not having a REMS at the time of an NDA?
Thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. It is not necessary that a sponsor submit a rationale for not having a REMS, but we think it would be particularly helpful. There have been occasions, of course, when the agency and the sponsors have had a different view of a particular risk. So understanding how they plan to mitigate a risk or why they think that it is not necessary, I think would be insightful. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is just a general one. Do all approved products require a
No, all approved products, this is Cynthia, I apologize. All approved products do not require a REMS. There's only a small amount of the drug approvals are approved with a REMS. In general, the benefit risk assessment is a judgment as to whether the benefits outweigh the risks. And that also considers their uncertainties and their approaches to managing the risks. So if a benefit risk assessment for a new drug can be fairly straightforward, when the drug's benefit is clinically meaningful and the drug safety profile is well characterized and has little concern for serious risks. And this is true for the majority of products, and for the majority of products, labeling is the mainstay of communicating risk and the safetiest conditions. Of course, it becomes somewhat more challenging in cases where there is potential serious safety risks, and also maybe the risks are life-threatening, life-shortening, or associated with morbidity or mortality. In these cases, the judgment or that the drug has a favorable benefit-risk profile may require a REMS to rebalance that benefit-risk profile.
Great explanation, thank you. This next question is a little bit more in-depth. Can a sponsor use electronic medical records or electronic health records to send REMS communications to prescribers? Is that something that you are accepting?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think later on this afternoon I encourage you to call in to or listen to Dr. Tersicani's presentation in terms of ways that we would like to better integrate REMS into the healthcare system and making this messaging more available in a way that healthcare providers want to receive those messages. So I think she'll be speaking a little bit more to that today, but I think we're encouraged by things that are beyond maybe a paper way to transmit that information or to communicate this safety information.
Great, thank you. Make sure everybody tunes in this afternoon. So our next question is about actually creating a REMS document. Does FDA have examples on how to write them, what a good one looks like, or is there a program that anyone can use that FDA provides on how to establish an effective REMS document?
Actually, there are. Thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. There are a couple tools that are available to sponsors and can really kind of expedite the review of the REMS from that perspective, the document itself. You can look at REMS at FDA, and you can see all the current REMS that are currently approved. All the documents and the materials are open to the public on that website. And I think that's helpful to kind of look at drugs that have similar risks or similar types of risk interventions. The other thing is that there is a guidance, the format and content of a REMS, and that particular guidance has a template for a REMS, and it kind of has a menu that you can kind of go through depending on the elements of the REMS that you're putting together for that particular program. And that is particularly helpful, and that was one of the things that I had mentioned. That was a 2017 guidance. So I think those would be helpful for people that are working on the REMS.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up question on REMS again. Are the REMS mandatory for every IND approved?
No, I think that ties into one of the previous questions, but that's an excellent question. So as I said before, not every drug requires a REMS. The vast majority of products that are approved are not approved with REMS. It really comes into play when there's very serious risks and you're trying to really balance the benefits and the risks based on maybe additional efforts that are needed for risk mitigation. So the answer would be no, not everyone requires a REMS. Thank you.
Okay, great. And our next question is going to be for Dr. Sheppard. So if you're ready, Dr. Sheppard, we have a question about can you explain the difference between minor and major modifications? If you can provide any details, that would be excellent.
Sure, thank you, and that's a great question. So we do have a guidance published on modifications and revisions that you can look into. But one of the key things to remember when you are looking at major and minor modifications is whether or not there's actually going to be a change to the safety risk. And so when we look at major mods, what we're looking at are there major changes to the safety risk messaging? Are you looking at removing a TASU? Are you looking at major changes to your structure? Whereas a minor mod might be something that has maybe like a minor change to your risk message, and or you might be changing the function of your website.
All right, great answer. Another question for Dr. Sheppard. For the meetings, at the pre-BLA NDA meetings, what factors are discussed with respect to REMS? Are all identified risks talked about, or just the salient ones?
So pre-BLA meetings and pre-NDA meetings are a great way to get feedback from the agency. One of the things that we will look at is we will look at both the risks that are known, and we can kind of have a good overview about all the safety risks balanced against kind of the efficacy of your product. One of the other things that we'll look at is we'll look at your safety protocols as you're actually doing your IND or actually doing your research, and kind of see what kind of risk mitigation that you have put into your protocols as you are going through your trials, and we also look into them. So if you, for instance, have a trial where in your trial you notice that there's potentially a liver signal and you have that built into your trial, we will look into that as you're at your pre-BLA meeting and be able to give you some feedback.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. And for another question that we have for, I guess, either or both, Can you explain how what strategies FDA will use to evaluate the effectiveness of the REMS program and the REMS strategies that each company is using?
Sorry, this is Cynthia. I was trying to get myself off mute so I can answer the question. I think you're going to be hearing a little bit more about this tomorrow with regard to Dr. Oth and also Dr. Harris. They'll be speaking on REMS assessments, but I just wanted to mention that there are 2 draft guidances that were published in 2019, and they include REMS assessment planning and reporting as well as survey methodology. And so, you know, it gives, it kind of lays out what is necessary for the planning and evaluation of REMS. It looks at program outreach and communications as well as program implementation and operations. It also wants to capture things such as knowledge assessments, the safe use behaviors that may be encouraged or necessary or required within the REMS, as well as the health outcomes or their surrogates. And I think they're going to give an excellent presentation tomorrow morning, so I think I would really encourage you to tune into that. But those 2 guidances are available, and I think they will provide a lot of useful information.
Very good. More good information to follow. So, next question is for Dr. LaCivita. Could you explain and define a substantial modification?
So a substantial, or really the terminology in the modification guidance, is a major modification. That circumstance would be when either the goals of the REMS are changed, the elements are changed, such as the elements to assure safe use, such as eliminating an element or adding an element, or also some significant changes to the materials. So other changes, such as revisions or more nominal changes, and minor modifications may be updates or changes to some of the materials, but wouldn't necessarily change the goals or the elements. And the time frames, of course, are different for those. For a major modification, the time frame for the review by the agency is 180 days. So thank you.
Great, okay. Our next question is for Dr. Sheppard. Can you clarify if a REMS, whether it should be or could be introduced from a sponsor for FDA approval, or just mandated by FDA?
Hi, that is a great question. So sponsors can, with submission of their application, propose a REMS to the agency, but it's finally under the agency's purview that we will be the ones who finally decide, you know, what your goal should be, and the actual ATASO that will be put in place into your REMS program. But when companies do submit a REMS ahead of time, a proposed REMS, we do look at that and see what kind of mitigation strategies the company is proposing, and whether or not we are aligning with them. And finally, it is the agency who actually will determine your goals and objectives and the ATASO for your REMS.
Okay, great. And along those lines, when is the best time to start putting a REMS together during drug development?
I can go ahead and answer that one. So I think one of the best things to start putting together a REMS during the drug development is as early as possible. If you're aware that you have a signal or a concern that you think is problematic that would need additional mitigation strategies, it's best just to come and talk to the agency. We would and are happy to give feedback and to help you kind of work through some things and some thoughts that you have. But as soon as you recognize that there is kind of a signal that you need, just to come and reach out to the FDA.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sheppard. Our last question is going to be for Dr. LaCivita. Can you discuss a little bit about the REMS elements, as well as what are the main differences between a generic company REMS and the innovator company REMS?
Thank you for that question. So the elements, the components of a REMS can include a medication guide, a communication plan, and then elements to ensure safe use. And it can include an implementation system and a timetable for submission of assessments. The elements that apply to ANDAs include a medication guide and the elements to ensure safe use. I think our presenters later on this afternoon, Elaine Littman and Laura Zendel, will be speaking a little bit about shared systems. And so when an ANDA is, the RLD has the requirements for elements to ensure safe use, the ANDA is subject to those same requirements. Previously, they needed to join a shared system together, but I'm sure that Elaine and them are going to give you updates with the Appropriations Act with regard to the changes that have occurred to the statute. So, with regard to the ANDAs, it's a medication guide and elements to ensure safe use.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. LaCivita, and again, thank you, Dr. Sheppard, for your fantastic presentations. And